You gotta kill people, you gotta rob, you gotta do what you gotta do to survive.
You have to do those things.
Yeah, you gotta do that.
And if you didn't do those things, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't be a gangbanger.
El Salvador may be tiny, but for years, it was suffocating under poverty, corruption, and the iron grip of ruthless gangs. So much so that even life-saving medical care came with a price. Then came a seismic shift. In just a few short years, the nation's murder rate plunged by over 80%. What bold strategies toppled these criminal empires and reclaimed the streets? Stay with us through every twist and turn to uncover the secret operations and daring moves that rewrote El Salvador's destiny. When streets become front lines. Imagine living in a country smaller than many U.S. states, sandwiched between Guatemala and Honduras, and where stepping outside your home felt like entering a war zone. In El Salvador, crime rates once soared so high you could practically count homicides by the minute. This tiny nation, home to roughly 6.5 million people, was gripped by violent gangs, and the numbers tell a story that reads like a nightmare. By 2011, the streets swarmed with an estimated 25,000 gang members walking free and another 43,500 locked up. Even those prison walls couldn't stop the violence. Murders shot past 4,000 before December arrived. From January 1st to November 30th, police tallied 4,005 killings, one more than the total in all of 2010, proof that the violence was not easing off. That year, some months felt worse than others. August took the grim prize, 391 homicides, making it the deadliest month since the 1992 peace accord ended the Civil War. Imagine averaging one killing every hour for an entire month. In one single day, a record-shattering 52 people were gunned down. Then November rolled in with 375 homicides, more than any November in the two preceding years, both of which had stayed below 320. Who were the victims? Police data painted a heartbreaking picture. Mostly men under 30, living in the country's busy cities. Most murders happened after 4 p.m., just as families were returning from work or school. Weekends were especially deadly, when the streets should have been filled with laughter and leisure. Instead, sirens screamed through the night and hospital beds filled faster than they could clear. Part of what fueled this bloodshed was the sheer number of illegal guns in circulation, more than 128,000 according to estimates. Firearms fueled about 70% of all murders. At the turn of 2012, the daily toll hovered around 16 lives lost each day. By the end of August that year, more than 3,830 people had been murdered. It was a pace of violence that felt impossible to escape. To put it in perspective, in 2015, the overall murder rate in El Salvador reached 104 killings per 100,000 people. That figure dwarfed rates in other troubled nations, 90 per 100,000 in Venezuela, once notorious for its violence, and stood in stark contrast to peacetime countries like the United Kingdom, where the rate was just 1 per 100,000. Authorities pointed fingers at the powerful street gangs, locked in endless battles over territory and extortion rackets. These groups ran the show, demanding protection money from shopkeepers, targeting young recruits, and treating neighborhoods like their personal battlegrounds. Extortion letters slid under doors. Midnight shootouts shattered windows. No one could move freely without risking a deadly encounter. In a land where the population was barely 6 million, the impact was staggering. Families lived in constant fear. Parents worried about sending their kids to school. Shop owners hesitated to open their doors. And friends wondered if a casual evening out would end in tragedy. The toll went beyond numbers on a page. It seeped into every aspect of daily life, eroding trust and choking off dreams. Then came 2022, and everything changed. After years of relentless gang crackdowns, El Salvador saw crime numbers tumble like dominoes. Suddenly, a country once famous for its daily violence was turning heads as the safest place in Central America. By 2024, the murder rate had plummeted to just 1.9 per 100,000 people, lower than anywhere else in Latin America. Think about that. A tiny nation that once averaged one killing every hour was now safer than many far larger neighbors. Over 9 years, the murder rate dropped an astonishing 98%. So how did this tiny nation pull off such an unbelievable transformation? How did a place once haunted by daily bloodshed become a regional symbol of safety? Well, we're about to find out how this jaw-dropping feat was actually achieved. But before we get to the takedown, we need to talk about the real forces behind the chaos, the ones who ruled neighborhoods like kings, turned playgrounds into battlegrounds, and made everyday people live in fear. MS-13, from refugee roots to a reign of terror. Back in the 1980s, the streets of Los Angeles were already tough, but they became the unexpected birthplace of something far darker. Civil war in El Salvador sent thousands of families fleeing for safety, and among them were young Salvadoran refugees who found themselves caught between two worlds. In LA's toughest neighborhoods, a new gang formed, Mara Salvatrucha, better known by its chilling code, MS-13. At first, MS-13 was a small crew of displaced teens looking for protection and a sense of belonging. But from the start, they made one thing clear: they would not be ignored. Their brutality and willingness to use violence carved out territory in the shadows of American city blocks. What began as fights over local drug corners and petty burglaries quickly spiraled into savage turf wars. The name MS-13 soon became a warning sign, not just in the alleys of Los Angeles, but halfway around the world. As MS-13 grew bolder, it didn't forget its roots. Members kept ties to El Salvador, where poverty, corruption, and social unrest made fertile ground for a gang that thrived on fear. Back home, the country was still dealing with the scars of its civil war. Families struggled to rebuild, and young people faced few real opportunities. Into that void, MS-13 slipped in, bringing its brand of violence and intimidation. Day by day, MS-13 spread its influence. They slipped into neighborhoods like ghosts, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. They preyed on the vulnerable, kids with no family support, shopkeepers trying to make an honest living, entire communities desperate for safety. Extortion became their bread and butter. Store owners were forced to pay protection fees. Families lived in terror, knowing a single missed payment could end in violence. The steady drip of cash lined MS-13's pockets and bought more weapons, fueling an endless cycle of fear. But extortion was only the beginning. MS-13 built a criminal empire spanning continents. They ran drug smuggling routes from South America to the United States, moving cocaine and other narcotics at every stop. The profits were staggering, and they funneled straight back into the gang's expansion. With each new dollar, MS-13 grew bolder, bribing corrupt officials, recruiting more members, and setting up new cells in towns and cities across El Salvador. Their tactics were ruthless. Rival gang members were hunted down with military precision, but innocent civilians often found themselves in the line of fire. A drive-by shooting meant to send a message could leave neighbors dead. A brutal beating in the street was a public display of power. The bloodshed wasn't just about removing rivals, it was a warning that MS-13 answered any challenge with overwhelming force. Barrio 18, from LA streets to Central American stronghold. Barrio 18, also known as the 18th Street Gang, began on the streets of Los Angeles and rose to become a major rival to MS-13. Though its roots may trace back to the 1950s, it truly took shape in the 1980s and made national headlines during the Rodney King riots, showing it was far more than just a local gang. Back then, Barrio 18's cliques stuck mostly to Mexican immigrant neighborhoods like MacArthur Park in Koreatown. They kept to themselves, building a tight-knit network with its own colors and hand signs. But Los Angeles was changing. people from all over Latin America moved in, and young men of Salvadoran, Honduran, and Guatemalan descent started joining up. That simple shift, opening the door to anyone who wanted in, set the stage for Barrio 18's spread far beyond California. In the late 1990s, an FBI task force and local police managed to haul some top Barrio 18 leaders off to court. You'd think locking them up would have crippled the gang. Instead, it backfired. Prison became a new command center. Inside federal lockups, bosses like Francisco Puppet Martinez figured out how to keep orders flowing to the streets. Some even linked up with the Mexican Mafia, a powerhouse prison gang that brought together Southern California street gangs under the Sureños banner. On the outside, Barrio 18 battled rivals like MS-13. Inside, they shook hands with them under the Mafia's watchful eye. By around 2005, that uneasy alliance splintered. Barrio 18 fractured into two rival camps, the Revolutionaries and the Sureños faction. Suddenly, infighting broke out within the gang itself, with members from both sides waging turf wars as fierce as those against MS-13. Yet even this internal chaos didn't stop their rise in Central America. El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, struggling with weak governments and widespread poverty, proved perfect for a gang ready to cash in on fear and intimidation. In those dusty urban neighborhoods, Barrio 18 wrung money from city buses and taxis, forcing drivers to pay up or face brutal beatings. They drove families from their homes and set up their own checkpoints, demanding taxes for safe passage. Then came a brief, shaky ceasefire. Leaders from both MS-13 and Barrio 18 claimed they wanted peace, and for a moment, homicides dipped. But the truce also gave them time to sharpen their tactics, building connections, honing smuggling routes, and learning to launder money more quietly. And as the temporary calm settled, the criminals quietly expanded their operations, slipping deeper into the fabrics of towns and villages. By mid-2013, the violence wasn't gone, it was just waiting to roar back. Extortion calls kept plaguing shopkeepers. People continued to vanish in the night. And by 2015, murders surged again, matching the grim peaks of earlier years. It was a wake-up call. Even a pause in killings couldn't erase the power these gangs had amassed. They had become too woven into the economy and politics of El Salvador to simply dismantle. The iron grip of emergency rule. In March 2022, President Nayib Bukele did something no Salvadoran leader had dared before. He declared a state of emergency to fight the gangs. What began as a one-month decree, sparked by a brutal wave of massacres that left 87 people dead, stretched on for nearly 2 years. For 20 months straight, Bukele's government enjoyed near-total authority to hunt down gang members, dismantle their networks, and choke off their cash. The result was a crackdown so fierce and far-reaching that it left gangs reeling and the rest of the world wondering how it had finally worked. The key lay in 3 hard truths: use of extreme legal measures, a loose definition of gang member, and Bukele's tight grip on politics. Ordinary rights were suspended, no warrants needed for arrest, families lost the guarantee of a quick hearing, and security forces could intercept any phone or message. Authorities could detain people indefinitely on vague suspicions, thanks to rules that allowed arrests based on tattoos, social media posts, or anonymous tips. In the first 2 months of the state of emergency, security forces arrested more than 33,000 people. Fear rippled through neighborhoods. If you looked or acted like you might belong to a gang, you could disappear overnight. That whirlwind of arrests struck at the heart of the gang's power. With so many foot soldiers behind bars, extortion rackets ground to a halt. Shopkeepers and bus drivers who once paid war taxes found relief. Drug routes clogged as distributors vanished. Gang leaders, cut off from their underlings, struggled to issue orders. Phones were seized, messages monitored, and safe houses raided. The gang's command chains fractured, leaving rival cells isolated and desperate. Yet the true shocker was the overall scale. In total, about 80,000 people suspected of gang activity were arrested. That figure dwarfs every past effort, showing just how far the government was willing to go. Streets once ruled by fear began to empty of lookouts and gunmen. Families dared to stroll to local markets. Schoolyards rang with children's laughter again. The violence didn't vanish overnight, but the sharp drop in murders told its own story. A society clawing back its peace. None of this could have lasted without Bukele's political dominance. In ordinary times, courts or Congress would have checked such draconian measures. Instead, his allies in the legislature fast-tracked every extension, and judges, some critics argue, shied away from pushing back. By November 2023, the emergency decree had been renewed 20 times in a row, each vote conducted with little debate. With no real opposition, the government held an iron grip on crime and on power itself. The crackdown's paradox is stark. The very steps that scare rights groups are the ones that helped smash a criminal empire. Extreme laws, speedy arrests, and political unity created a perfect storm against gangs that had thrived on silence and corruption. MS-13, Barrio 18, and other violent gangs found themselves exposed, their dark networks laid bare in daylight. Fortress of Silence. In January 2023, El Salvador opened its doors to the biggest prison in Latin America, the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CICOT. Built in the mountain town of Tecoluca, about 45 miles east of the capital. CICOT was designed to hold up to 40,000 inmates convicted or suspected of gang activity. 8 sprawling pavilions rise behind high concrete walls and razor wire, each pavilion containing dozens of cells that cram in 65 to 70 men apiece. Every cell is stark and unforgiving. There are no mattresses, no sheets, no pillows, only a bare cement floor, an open toilet in one corner, and a small basin for washing. Next to the basin sits a barrel of water used for drinking. Lights stay on 24 hours a day, offering no comfort of night or natural rhythm. Across the facility, more than 1,000 security personnel, guards, police officers, and soldiers stand watch, patrolling every corridor and tower. 3 rings of defense guard the prison, 9 meters of solid concrete, 3 meters of electrified fencing carrying 15,000 volts, and an outer barrier bristling with guards ready for any emergency. Getting inside CICOT requires passing through layers of checks that rival international airport security. Visitors and staff hand over badges and phones, remove shoes, and submit to full-body scans. Cell signals vanish before reaching the gate. Inside the perimeter, no one slips through unnoticed. Cameras cover every hallway. Guards monitor screens in a central control room. A metal detector greets anyone moving between sections, ensuring no contraband passes. Once inside a pavilion, an inmate never leaves it. All services, medical care, legal hearings, even brief court appearances, take place within the same hardened walls. Inmates earn a 30-minute break each day to step into the central hall for exercise or a short religious service, usually Bible reading for a small group. The rest of the day, doors clang shut, confining men to their cells for 23.5 hours. Solitary confinement is the ultimate punishment for those who break rules or attack others. Inmates considered dangerous to guards or fellow prisoners spend up to 15 days alone in windowless cells barely large enough to stand or sit. A small hole in the ceiling provides a sliver of daylight and a grim reminder of the outside world. Critics of CICOT call it a grave violation of human rights. There is no rehabilitation here, no schools, no workshops, no library, no letters from home. Meals slide through metal slots in the doors. Often rice, beans, and a piece of fruit, never meat. Prison staff insist that this total isolation and rigid control are necessary to contain the worst of the worst: mass murderers, extortion bosses, gang leaders marked by tattoos that cover their faces, necks, and hands. Under Salvadoran law, these men fall under the broad label of terrorists, stripped of chances for parole or house arrest. In practice, SICOT has become the final stop in a sprawling crackdown. Families of those locked away face a long ordeal. Many waiting for updates never receive any. Lawyers and human rights groups report being blocked from visiting or even exchanging letters. Word of mouth and smuggled whispers are the only links to the outside. A leaked government database revealed that nearly 39,000 inmates were jailed under the expanded unlawful association law, not for specific violent crimes, but for simple ties to gangs, real or imagined. Inside the prison, daily routines for guards blend discipline with constant vigilance. Armories dot each pavilion, stocked with riot gear, rifles, and shields. Regular drills remind officers of the risks: cell riots, escape attempts, or smuggled weapons. Training emphasizes control and rapid response. Shields up, batons at the ready. Visitors must surrender all metal objects, watches, and jewelry before passing through checkpoints. Public opinion remains sharply divided. Many Salvadorans praise SICOT as proof that the government is serious about ending decades of gang terror. Tourists, once deterred by headlines of extortion and murder, now stroll safely through historic squares. Businesses that closed under fear of war taxes have reopened. Confidence has returned to streets once echoing with gunfire. Residents now admit they no longer live under the constant gaze of gang lookouts or strict movement rules. The plazas, parks, and street corners once claimed by criminals have been reclaimed by the community. In San Salvador's historic center, a police officer noted that gang members vanished just 2 weeks after the state of emergency began, an area that not long ago was a notorious hotspot for violence. Across the country, the criminal economy that gangs once controlled has collapsed. Families say no one knocks on their doors demanding war taxes anymore. One bus company owner, who used to hand over about $6,000 every month to 3 major gangs, stopped paying as soon as the crackdown started and hasn't seen a single extortion attempt since. For years, everyday activities carried great risk. Stepping into a park meant watching for ambushes. Going out at night could end in a kidnapping. But today, community centers hum with activity and soccer fields pulse with weekend matches. Neighbors organize art workshops, youth clubs, and weekend markets, projects they never dared to launch before. These changes happened fast, and their impact can't be overstated. Where fear once silenced voices and shut down gathering spots, laughter and conversation now fill the air. Children play freely at playgrounds that were once off-limits. Teenagers gather after school without worrying about gang patrols. Even elderly residents walk from home to church without glancing over their shoulders. It's no surprise then that President Nayib Bukele, credited with leading the harsh crackdown, enjoys massive respect at home. On February 4, 2024, he won re-election with 83% of the vote, a result almost unheard of in modern democracies. His approval rating usually hovers around 90%, making him not just one of El Salvador's most popular presidents, but often referred to as the most popular leader in Latin America. Outside observers may criticize the methods used, but for Salvadorans who lived through years of daily terror, the results speak for themselves. The swift disappearance of gang influence, the revival of public spaces, and the burst of community life all tell a story of transformation. El Salvador's streets are no longer battlegrounds but gathering places, proof that life beyond fear is possible, and that change can come faster than anyone imagined. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Behind rows of cold steel bars, arrested gang members huddle in cramped cages barely large enough to stand. Their once bold tattoos, proud symbols of territory and power, now blur in the dim light as they press their faces against the mesh, eyes hollow with defeat. Chains clink on concrete floors, and muted whispers of plans that can't come true drift through the air. Yet just beyond the prison walls, a different scene unfolds. Children stroll safely to school, their laughter echoing off bright sidewalks. In nearby plazas, kids chase soccer balls under open skies, unburdened by fear. The same nation that cages its criminals now lets its youngest roam free, raising one urgent question. Can this safety endure? Laws that locked the gates. Right after declaring the state of emergency, President Buell and his allies in the legislature turned their attention to the legal toolbox. They pushed through sweeping reforms that weren't just about locking up more people, they changed the rules of the game entirely. First, they slapped harsher prison terms on anyone caught with gang ties. No more light sentences or early release. Gang membership itself carried a stiff penalty. Then they stripped away the option of house arrest for those labeled part of a terrorist group. Under Salvadoran law, gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 fell squarely under that harsh label. Next came the toughest blow to underage suspects. The new rules lowered the age at which courts could try youths for gang-related crimes down to 12. 12. A kid barely out of grade school could now face the same courtroom as hardened criminals. The idea was to nip recruitment in the bud, scaring off any young soul thinking about joining. Critics warned it was a brutal choice, punishing children rather than fixing the conditions that pushed them toward gangs in the first place. But the government held firm. Fear of heavy sentences, they argued, would keep kids away from gang life. While the new sentences made headlines, a subtler change proved just as powerful. On March 30th, 2022, lawmakers tweaked the unlawful association law, agrupaciones ilícitas, to sweep in far more people. Before, police could target known gang members or homeboys, those with tattoos and street cred. After the tweak, authorities could arrest anyone who promotes, helps, facilitates, or favors a criminal group. Now, that included wannabe recruits, chequeos, and even suspected collaborators who might lend a hand now and then. There was no official checklist defining these roles, no clear method for deciding who fell into which category. All it took was an accusation. This broad brush gave security forces an easy pretext for arrests under the state of emergency. Human Rights Watch and the local group Cristosal later cited a leaked government database showing that by January 2023, about 61,000 people had been detained under emergency rules, and 39,000 of them were held for unlawful association alone. That meant 2 out of every 3 people in prison weren't charged with violence or extortion. They were jailed for simply belonging to or supporting a gang, however loosely. Behind the scenes, some police officers admitted they worried that this all-powerful law could come back to haunt them. In San Miguel, a local officer told colleagues he felt uneasy about signing off on so many vague arrest warrants. He and his team quietly approached 2 judges for advice. Would they face prosecution later for sweeping up suspects on flimsy charges? The judges gave them the green light, assuring them that in the current climate, no one would challenge these mass arrests. Feeling safe, the officers moved forward, detaining hundreds more. It was a clear signal. The courts had bowed to the emergency, and police had free rein. From a distance, the numbers looked staggering but simple. More arrests meant fewer gang members on the streets, and that meant less crime, right? In practice, the mix of tougher penalties, lower age limits, and an ever-widening definition of gang ties created a massive net that scooped up the guilty, the innocent, and the unsure alike. Entire neighborhoods lived in fear. parents whispered cautions to their teenagers. Don't talk to strangers. Don't post about friends on social media. Don't let anyone spot a tattoo you don't have. One wrong move or one careless comment could land you behind bars. While these laws raised serious questions about human rights, they also helped keep the pressure on gangs. Suddenly, nobody could slip through the cracks. Collaborators who once passed notes, scouts who watched for police, and lookouts who stood guard all faced the same risk: long prison terms with no chance at house arrest. Without support networks, gangs found it harder to coordinate extortion, drug runs, or reinforcements. Their shadows grew shorter, their hold on communities loosened. Still, the human cost was heavy. Prisons grew crowded, cells turned cramped, and medical care became scarce. Lawyers and family members often couldn't reach those locked up. Some detainees said they were beaten or denied food. Yet each day, new laws reinforced the walls. Every extension of the state of emergency added months or years to the uncertainty. When copycats miss the mark. El Salvador's dramatic drop in gang violence inspired its neighbor, Honduras, to try the same emergency playbook. In 2022, Honduran President Xiomara Castro declared a nationwide state of emergency, flooding the streets with soldiers and police, suspending rights, and vowing to crush the gangs. A year later, the hoped-for turnaround never arrived. Despite the boosted presence of security forces, crime didn't budge. Gang shootings and extortion calls continued at the same grim pace. Worse yet, armed conflict monitors reported that violence had slipped out of traditional hot zones. Pressure on gangs in big cities simply pushed criminals into smaller towns and rural areas. Villages that once slept peacefully found themselves caught up in turf battles and fresh rounds of extortion. Experts point to Honduras's weak institutions as the main culprit. Police forces remain underfunded, plagued by corruption, and lacking training. In some areas, officers openly distrust their own government, suspecting the crackdown is more about optics than real reform. With courts overwhelmed and prosecutors short-staffed, suspects languish in pre-trial detention or slip through the cracks entirely. Geography also worked against the plan. Honduras's rugged terrain and porous borders offered gangs new hideouts and smuggling routes. In contrast to El Salvador's small size and centralized population, Honduras's larger, fragmented landscape made coordinated sweeps tougher to pull off. Politics added another layer of complexity. Castro's administration faced fierce pushback from opposition parties and human rights groups. Frequent legal challenges slowed down emergency extensions, and judges sometimes threw out arrests made on flimsy evidence. Public support for the measures waned as stories of innocent people detained for days or weeks surfaced. Compared to El Salvador's unified political backing for Bukele's approach, Honduras's democratic tug-of-war undercut the crackdown's consistency. Critics warn that Honduras's state of emergency became a PR stunt, designed to look as tough as El Salvador without the follow-through. A full year of special measures failed to yield El Salvador-style results, suggesting that simply copying a neighbor's strategy isn't enough. True success, they argue, requires strong institutions, clear legal frameworks, and genuine political unity.